You're watching a 53-year-old man being shown a photocopy of his own handwriting and telling the FBI he has never had it. The handwriting is his. Everyone in the room knows that. The photocopy shows the front covers of two small books, a day planner and an address book, and a page of what was written inside them. Inside those pages, according to the Justice Department, were the true names of human beings who had agreed to spy for America. Their real names, their phone numbers, where they met their handlers, the addresses of buildings the CIA did not admit owning. His name is Jerry Chun Shing Lee. He is a naturalized American citizen born in Hong Kong. He served 4 years in the U.S. Army. He has a master's degree from a university in Honolulu. And for 13 years he was a CIA case officer, a recruiter and handler of foreign agents trained by the agency in covert communications, in surveillance detection, in how to pay a man so that nobody can trace the money. Between May 2010 and December 2013, prosecutors say more than $840,000 in cash moved into his personal bank account in Hong Kong. And in the same window, from the last weeks of 2010 through the end of 2012, the network of Chinese agents the CIA had spent years building came apart. Killed or imprisoned 18 to 20 of them, according to two former senior American officials. One was reportedly shot in front of his colleagues in a courtyard at a government building. Here is the part that should bother you. The American government never charged Jerry Lee with actually handing anything over. Not one document, not one name. His prosecutors stood in a courtroom in Alexandria, Virginia, and argued that it was the only explanation left. His lawyers answered that the government had nothing but a theory and a bank statement. And there was a second theory, a theory that says no traitor was needed at all, that the CIA killed its own agents by accident, with software. To understand why nobody can close this case, you have to start with a man who was taught, by professionals, exactly how not to get caught. Jerry Lee enlisted in the United States Army in 1982 and left it in 1986, then Hawaii. In 1992, he took a bachelor's degree in international business management from Hawaii Pacific University. In 1993, he added a master's in human resource management. On the 16th of September 1994, he signed a government form numbered 368, a lifetime binding non-disclosure agreement. The language of that form is not decorative. I will never disclose in any form or any manner to any person not authorized by the Central Intelligence Agency to receive it any information or material. He would sign more of them over the years, each one promising the same thing in slightly different words. That same year, 1994, he entered duty with the CIA. The affidavit that would eventually be sworn against him lists, in one flat sentence, what the agency taught him: methods of covert communications, surveillance detection, recruitment of assets, handling of assets, payment of assets, operational security, and the documenting, handling, and securing of classified material. Read that list again slowly. It is not a resume. It is an inventory of every skill a man would need to do the thing he was later accused of doing. He served in various overseas positions and locations. All of them required a top-secret clearance. He held one, continuously, from 1994 until the day he left. He was, in the words his own defense attorney would use before a federal judge 25 years later, an exemplary employee. Now hold that man in your head and look at what the agency he worked for had achieved by the year 2010. It was, briefly, the best China had ever been. 4 former officials told the New York Times the same thing. In 2010, the quality of the CIA's information about the inner workings of the Chinese government was the best it had been for years. Not adequate, the best. The agency had recruited sources sitting deep inside the bureaucracy in Beijing, some of them Chinese nationals whom the CIA believed had grown disgusted with the corruption of their own government. Understand what that means in practice. It means somebody in a ministry office in Beijing decided, on his own, to betray his country to a foreigner, and then went to work every morning and behaved normally, and did that for years. It means an American met him somewhere in a city where every hotel lobby and every restaurant table is a possible microphone. That is what those files were made of, not satellites, people with families. By the end of 2010, the information started to dry up. Not all at once, the way a tap goes quiet when someone closes a valve in another room. By early 2011, senior officers at Langley understood the problem, and the problem was not the tap. Their sources were disappearing. Go back 3 years to 2007, because that is the year Jerry Lee walked out. He left the CIA. His clearance was terminated. He moved his family to Hong Kong, the city he was born in, and he went looking for work in the private sector. And the private sector did not want what he was selling. He got a job with a Japanese tobacco company. He was fired. Then, in 2010, according to what prosecutors told the court, he started his own tobacco firm, a small import business, with a business partner. Not a stranger, a former Hong Kong police detective. A man, prosecutors said, with ties to Chinese intelligence. Sit with that for a second. A former CIA man, 46 years old, out of the agency for 3 years, no longer cleared, no longer paid, no longer anybody, and his new business partner is a retired cop, wired into the intelligence service of the country he used to spy on. Prosecutors would later tell the court that Lee lied to investigators about the finances of that company, and that he claimed clients he did not have, that his little cigarette firm counted Gucci and the British consulate among its customers. When investigators told him the whole thing looked like a front for illegal activity, Lee's answer, according to prosecutors, was 10 words long. "I hear you, but I'm not going to say anything." That was said years later. In April 2010, he was still just a businessman with a partner and a plan, and he went to dinner. The dinner was in Shenzhen, across the border from Hong Kong. Private. 2 men were there whose names the government has never made public. The court record identifies them only as Chinese intelligence officers, and it is very specific about what they did at that table. They already knew about his work for the CIA in China. They told him they wanted national defense information, the things he had learned in 13 years as a case officer, and they were prepared to pay for it. Not vaguely, specifically. They told him they had prepared for him a gift of $100,000 in cash. According to the account given in court, they also gave him a cell phone. And then they made him the offer that appears, word for word, in the government's own press releases about this case. They offered to take care of him for life. For life. 2 words doing an enormous amount of work. Not a fee for a document. A pension. A relationship. The exact thing they train you to offer somebody else. Here is what Jerry Lee did next, and it is the strangest decision in this entire story. He reported it. He contacted a former CIA colleague and told him he had been approached by Chinese intelligence. That is the correct thing to do. That is what the training says. He told the truth about the approach, and he left out one detail. He never mentioned that they had offered to pay him for information. He told the truth with a hole in the middle of it, and the hole was the whole story. Because he had already decided. The cash starts on the 14th of May, 2010. That day, a deposit of 138,000 Hong Kong dollars, roughly 17,468 US dollars, went into Lee's personal bank account. Prosecutors call it the first of hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash deposits made into his personal HSBC account, and it gives an end date for the pattern, December 2013. 3.5 years of cash. It did not arrive like a payoff in a film, in a briefcase, all at once. It arrived like weather. A little, and then a little more. And then you look up, and it has been raining for 3 years. 12 days after that first deposit, on the 26th of May, 2010, Lee sat down at his laptop and wrote a document, Court documents describe what was in it, certain locations to which the CIA would assign officers with certain identified experience, and the particular location and time frame of a sensitive CIA operation. The document was classified at the secret level. Then he moved it off the laptop and onto a thumb drive, and then he deleted it. Not shredded, deleted. Which, on a thumb drive, is not the same thing as gone. It is like tearing a page out of a book and leaving it in the bin beside the desk. It is the difference between burning a letter and putting it in a drawer you have stopped opening. That distinction would matter enormously 2 years later in a hotel room in Hawaii. Requests began arriving in May 2010 and continued into at least 2011. The government calls them taskings. The majority of them, it says, asked Lee to reveal sensitive information about the CIA. At his sentencing, Lee admitted to receiving 21 of them. Now cut 4,000 miles east to a building nobody has ever named in Northern Virginia. By early 2011, the CIA and the FBI had opened a joint investigation, run by the senior counterintelligence officials of both agencies, out of a secret office in Northern Virginia. One former senior American official told the New York Times the operation had a code name, Honeybadger. They did the only thing you can do when your agents start vanishing. They went back through every single operation being run in Beijing, every meeting, every route, every cable. They read their own operation backwards, the way you reread a contract after the money vanishes. And then they went through the people. Nearly every employee at the American embassy in Beijing was scrutinized, the Times reported, no matter how high-ranking they were. Imagine being a career officer in that building in 2011. Someone is reading your travel records. Someone is reading your finances. Somebody in a room in Virginia has your name on a list, and the list is short, and it is getting shorter. And while they worked, the phone kept ringing. Former officials described the calls to the Times in 4 words that arrived over and over from the other side of the world. We lost another one. What the taskings actually asked for is the part the public record keeps almost, but not quite, out of reach. We know there were 21. We know the majority of them asked about the CIA. We know that Lee told the FBI in 2013 that he had received taskings and that he had not kept the written requests because, in his words, they would tend to incriminate him. Think about the discipline in that answer. He destroyed the questions and kept the notebooks. He got rid of the evidence that someone was asking and held on to the evidence that he already knew. The indictment adds one more piece of tradecraft. The Chinese intelligence officers gave Lee email addresses so they could communicate covertly. Not a dead drop under a bridge, email. The most ordinary thing in the world, which is exactly why it works. And the deposits kept coming, past the last known tasking in 2011, through 2012, into December 2013. Somebody was still paying for something. No prosecutor has ever said in public, what? In China, people were being killed. The New York Times reported it in May 2017, sourced to 10 current and former American officials. From the final weeks of 2010 through the end of 2012, the Chinese killed at least a dozen of the CIA's sources. According to 3 of the officials, one of them was shot in front of his colleagues, in the courtyard of a government building, not an execution carried out quietly in a basement, but a message, delivered outdoors, to everyone standing there who might also have been working for the CIA. Others were put in prison. In total, according to 2 former senior American officials, the Chinese killed or imprisoned 18 to 20 of the agency's sources in China. Later reporting pushed the number higher. Foreign Policy, working from 5 current and former intelligence officials, put the figure at around 30 executed, and said some sources spoke of higher numbers still. Those officials also said something colder than any number. Every CIA asset detained by Chinese intelligence in that period was eventually killed. American officials told the Times The losses rivaled what the agency lost in the Soviet Union and Russia during the betrayals of Aldrich Ames and Robert Hanssen. Those two names are the worst in the history of American counterintelligence. Ames was arrested in February 1994, a 31-year CIA veteran who had been selling to Moscow since 1985. Hanssen was arrested in February 2001 from inside the FBI. This was in their weight class. Michael Morell, a former deputy director of the CIA, said that theory ran into a man named Mark Kelton, at the time the CIA's top spy hunter. Kelton resisted the mole theory, at least at first, and former officials told the Times exactly why. Kelton had been close friends with Brian Kelly, a CIA officer whom the FBI had wrongly suspected in the 1990s of being a Russian spy. Kelly was innocent. The real traitor was Robert Hanssen, sitting inside the FBI the whole time. Kelton brought Kelly up in meetings during the China crisis, colleagues said, and told the room he would not accuse a man without ironclad evidence. The second explanation was that the Americans had simply been sloppy. Some FBI agents became convinced that CIA handlers in Beijing had been traveling the same routes to the same meeting points too often, and in a city carpeted with cameras, a repeated route is a signature. Worse, some officers, former officials said, met their sources at a restaurant where Chinese agents had planted listening devices, and where even the waiters worked for Chinese intelligence. Some of the officers who had built the network refused both of those theories and believed they had been caught in the middle of a turf war inside their own agency. The third explanation had nothing to do with loyalty or with tradecraft. It had to do with a piece of software, and it is the one that turns this entire story inside out. Here is how you can lose 20 agents without a traitor. Pay attention, because this is explained once. When a CIA officer starts working with a brand new source, someone unproven, someone who might be a double agent sent to burn him, the officer does not put that person on the main system. He uses a separate, temporary one, an interim system. Inside the agency, according to Foreign Policy's sources, the informal word for it was a throwaway. The throwaway used in China in that period was internet-based, and you reached it from an ordinary laptop or desktop computer. That was the point. Simple enough for a frightened man in Beijing to use without training. And it was supposed to be sealed off from the main platform, the one used to talk to vetted, trusted sources. Same family, shared code, but separated, so that if a new recruit turned out to be working for the other side and handed the throwaway straight to his real employers, the damage would stop there. No trail back to anybody who mattered. No trail back to the CIA at all. The interim system contained a technical error. Architecturally, it connected back to the main covert communications platform. When the agency began to suspect a compromise, the FBI and the NSA ran penetration tests on it. What they found was that anyone with the technical skill and access to reach the throwaway could also reach the main system, the one carrying the vetted sources. One former official summarized it in a single sentence that Foreign Policy printed with a word I will not repeat. The CIA had wrecked the firewall between the two. It gets worse. American officers examining the system found digital fingerprints connecting it back to the American government itself. Some of those links, one former official said, pointed back to parts of the CIA's own website. And this thing had not been designed for China. It had been imported from the agency's operations in the Middle East, where the Internet is a far less dangerous place to be a spy. In China, all traffic passes through the Great Firewall, unusual patterns get flagged, and the state runs a special task force built for exactly this: Ministry of State Security officers working alongside the Chinese military's Signals Directorate, their rough equivalent of the NSA. The window between the two systems may have been open for only a few months. The Chinese got in during the window, and a man had already warned them in writing years earlier. His name is John Reedy, and he was a contractor managing human sources for the CIA in Iran, a different country, the same family of software. In 2008, he filed a warning that the agency was heading into a massive intelligence failure involving its communications. By 2010, he was reporting that the nightmare scenario had already happened. In November 2011, he was fired, officially for alleged conflicts of interest. He believed it was retaliation. What happened in Iran also tells you how thin the wall really was. Reporting by Zach Dorfman and Jenna McLaughlin found that an Iranian double agent simply showed his own service the website the CIA had built to talk to him, and from that one address, Iranian officials used Google's advanced search operators to go looking for the others. Not a zero-day exploit, search terms, the kind of thing printed in a beginner's how-to book. One official described the reaction inside the agency to the simplicity of it as shock and awe. There is more. One former official said the agency had strong indications that China shared what it had learned with Russia, where some assets were using a similar system. And around the exact period the China network was being taken apart, multiple sources inside Russia abruptly cut off contact with their CIA handlers. Nobody has ever counted those, and everything up to this point is the part both sides agree on. From here on, every single fact is contested by somebody with a security clearance. Once they were inside, they didn't need a list of names. They needed one. Identify a single asset, watch who he meets, follow the handler, and the network comes apart the way a sweater comes apart. One thread, one sleeve, and then the whole thing is thread. The attitude inside the agency's China operation before all this was described by one of those former officials in 9 words. The attitude was that we've got this, we're untouchable. He used another word to describe how the China hands saw themselves at the time: invincible. And here is the sentence that made the case against Jerry Lee unwinnable, and that no prosecutor ever had to answer in open court. Foreign policy's officials said plainly that Lee's alleged betrayal, on its own, could not explain all of the damage done in China in 2011 and 2012. The reason is structural. Information about human sources is compartmented, not filed, compartmented, the way a submarine is built, so that a flood in one section does not sink the vessel. Lee would not have known who those people were. Another of the officials described the pattern of the arrests in a way that cuts the other direction, hard. You could tell the Chinese weren't guessing. The Ministry of State Security were always pulling in the right people. Not guessing. Every time, the right person. The task force in Northern Virginia eventually wrote down a conclusion, and it is the most honest sentence any of these agencies produced about the whole disaster. They found that a confluence and combination of events had wiped out the spy network, which is a formal way of saying, more than one thing went wrong, and we cannot tell you how much of it was him. But in 2012, they were not writing conclusions yet. They were trying to get one man into a room. Jerry Lee lived in Hong Kong, and that city is not a place the FBI can walk into with a warrant. So the mole hunt did something Lee would have recognized instantly because it is his own trick, turned around and pointed at him. They ran an operation on him. In early 2012, Lee's former CIA colleague, the same relationship Lee had used 2 years earlier to report the Shenzhen approach, urged him to apply to come back to the agency. Former officers get contract work all the time. It is the most natural offer in the world. It was a ruse. Its entire purpose was to bring him onto American soil, where he could be questioned. He took it. He came. And over the following year he sat through a series of interviews with the CIA, and every time the conversation came near the thing that mattered, what did those 2 men in Shenzhen actually want from you? He steered around it. The Justice Department's language is precise. Throughout those interviews, Lee intentionally failed to disclose that he had received taskings. He sat in rooms full of former colleagues and lied about the most important fact of his life. That summer, an FBI team would open his suitcase in a hotel room in Honolulu and photograph the two objects that would end his life as a free man 5.5 years later. The 10th of August, 2012. Lee and his family departed Hong Kong. They were not visiting. They were moving home to Northern Virginia for good. On the way, they stopped in Honolulu for a few days, as families crossing the Pacific do. The next day, the 11th of August, surveillance teams watched him check into a hotel in Honolulu. Hotel records later given to the FBI show the stay, the 11th through the 14th. On the 13th of August, 2012, agents executed a court-authorized search of that hotel room and of his luggage. They did not seize anything. They photographed everything. Inside his luggage, in a small, clear plastic travel pack, the kind of thing you keep a toothbrush and a razor in, were two small books. The affidavit describes them as best understood as a datebook and an address book. Both were filled with handwriting. The datebook ran to roughly 49 pages. Only the pages with writing on them were photographed. What the FBI photographed, according to the affidavit sworn by Special Agent Kelly O'Brien of the Bureau's Counterintelligence Division, was this: operational notes from asset meetings, operational meeting locations, operational phone numbers, true names of assets, and covert facilities. The address book ran to roughly 21 pages. It contained the true names and phone numbers of assets and of covert CIA employees, together with the addresses of CIA facilities. Read the phrase, "true names," again, and let it land. In this profession, an asset has a cryptonym, a file designator, a pseudonym for cables, layers of naming stacked over him like sandbags, and all of them there for one reason, which is that a real name is a death sentence. The true name is the thing the entire architecture is built to hide. A CIA classification authority went through the photographs and made a determination. The books held classified information up to and including secret, and, in at least one instance, top secret, the disclosure of which could cause exceptionally grave damage to the national security of the United States. Then the agents put everything back exactly as they had found it and left, and let him fly on. 2 days later, in Fairfax, Virginia, they opened his luggage again. The 15th of August, 2012. Lee and his family arrived and checked into a hotel in Fairfax, inside the Eastern District of Virginia, which is the jurisdiction that would eventually try him. That same day, agents executed a second court-authorized search and photographed his possessions again. The two books were still there, still in the same small, clear plastic travel pack, still in his luggage. He had carried them 4,800 miles, through 2 airports, across an international border, in a bag he checked or wheeled or lifted into an overhead bin. Not in a safe, not encrypted, in a toiletry pouch, riding in the hold like a bag of duty-free. And then the FBI did the piece of work that turned 2 photographs into a case. They went to the cables. Paragraph 22 of the affidavit is 1 sentence, and it is the coldest sentence in the file. The classified cables that Lee wrote when he was a case officer, the ones describing his meetings with assets and what he learned from them, the ones he himself had authority over, contain much of the information reflected in the books. His notebooks matched his own reporting, not somebody's rumors. His own work, copied out by hand, by him, and carried out of the country. Which brings us to the moment where a film would end. If this were a film, this is the scene. It is August 2012. The FBI has photographs of 2 notebooks containing the true names of American agents in a suitcase in a Virginia hotel. It has the bank deposits. It has the Shenzhen approach that he reported without mentioning the money. It has a network of dead men on one side of the world, and a man with their names on the other. Agents knock on the hotel room door, he opens it in his socks, and it is over. Case closed. Roll credits. Nobody knocked. Jerry Lee lived in Northern Virginia for the next 10 months, from the 15th of August, 2012, until the 6th of June, 2013. During that time, the affidavit says, he met with former CIA colleagues and other government employees and stayed in contact with them. He never surrendered the books. He never mentioned that he had them. And he was not the only one keeping something back. Because there was a fact about those notebooks that the government would not disclose for another 7 years. And when it finally came out, it came out of the mouth of his own defense lawyer. In May and June of 2013, the FBI interviewed him 5 separate times. 5. That is not a conversation. That is a siege. In one of those interviews, Lee admitted that he had received taskings from the Chinese officers and explained that he had not kept the written requests because they would tend to incriminate him. Then the agents produced the document from the thumb drive. They had imaged the drive after Honolulu, and they had found the file he wrote on the 26th of May, 2010, sitting in the unallocated space, the part of a drive where deleted things go to wait. Lee denied possessing it. He said he did not know who created it. He said he did not know why it would be on his computer. He denied deleting it. Approximately 1 week later, in another interview, he admitted all of it. He had created the document in response to 2 taskings from the Chinese officers. He had transferred it to a thumb drive. He said he had thought about giving it to them. He said he never did. And then, on the 6th of June 2013, Jerry Chun Shing Lee left the country and went back to Asia. Nothing happened to him for 4.5 years. He worked. For roughly the 20 months before his arrest, he was a security specialist at Christie's, the auction house, a man paid to protect a building full of catalogued, insured, carefully guarded objects. The deposits into his HSBC account continued into December 2013 and then stopped, as far as the public record shows, like a radio station going off the air mid-sentence. The reason for that delay has never been explained in public. The Washington Times asked the question out loud in January 2018. Was it because he lived in Hong Kong, beyond reach? Or was the government sitting on the case, hoping that watching him would produce something bigger? Whatever the answer is, it ran out on the 13th of January 2018, when Special Agent Kelly O'Brien signed her affidavit before a magistrate judge named John F. Anderson. 2 days later, Jerry Lee got on a plane. He landed at John F. Kennedy International Airport in Queens, New York, on the 15th of January, 2018. He was arrested that night. The charge at that moment was almost insultingly small. 1 count of unlawful retention of national defense information, maximum 10 years. The Justice Department announced it the following afternoon after his first appearance in a Brooklyn courtroom, and the announcement was 3 paragraphs of dry procedure describing 2 small books with handwritten notes. And then, in January 2018, FBI agents sat down with him. This is the scene we started with. They asked whether he had ever kept work-related notes at home. He said no. That was false. They showed him the photocopy, the front covers of the day planner and the address book, and a copy of his own handwriting from inside them. He denied that he had possessed the notebooks while transiting through Hawaii in August 2012. That was false, and the FBI had the photographs to prove it, and he had to know they did. They asked whether either book contained notes from asset meetings. He said no. That was false. And then, in the same breath, he conceded something that gave the whole game away. He agreed that any such notes would be classified. They asked about the thumb drive. He denied ever putting the document on one, 5 years after telling FBI agents that he had. And then they asked him what the document had been, and Jerry Lee, 13 years a CIA case officer, described a secret-level file listing where the agency posted officers with particular experience and the place and time of a live operation, as something he had written down more like a diary thing. That was his defense of it. A diary. He was denying his own handwriting in a room where they were holding a photograph of it, and it no longer mattered what he said, because the case had stopped depending on his answers a long time ago. On the 8th of May, 2018, a grand jury in the Eastern District of Virginia indicted him properly. 1 count of conspiracy to gather or deliver national defense information to aid a foreign government, plus 2 counts of unlawful retention. His lawyer, Edward McMahon, had already drawn his line months earlier, after Lee's first appearance in court, in one flat sentence. Mr. Lee is not a Chinese spy. He is a loyal American who loves his country. The acting U.S. attorney who announced the indictment, Tracy Doherty McCormick, went with the driest sentence available to her. The allegations in this case, she said, are troubling. Beijing had answered months earlier, and not dryly at all. Days after the arrest, the state-owned Global Times ran an editorial calling the whole thing a witch hunt with unjust consequences for Americans of Chinese descent. The United States, it said, seems to be mobilizing a mass movement to chase down Chinese spies and penetrators, and if this continues, many Chinese will be wronged. That is what a government says when it does not intend to discuss the notebooks. 11 months later, on the 1st of May 2019, Lee stood up in front of senior U.S. District Judge T.S. Ellis III and pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage. Ellis asked him to describe in his own words what he had done. I conspired to gather and send secret information to the PRC. Sentencing came on the 22nd of November 2019 in Alexandria, Virginia, and it was not a formality. It was an argument about the hole at the center of the case, conducted in public by both sides before the man who had to decide. Assistant U.S. Attorney Neil Hammerstrom argued from the money backward. $840,000 is not what anyone pays for nothing. For this amount of money, the Chinese must have been getting really top-drawer, high-quality national defense information. We put all the pieces together. He sold out his country for money. His defense attorney, Nina Ginsburg, took the same hole and stood on the other side of it. The government described their worst possible nightmare, she said, but it has no proof that it was caused. McMahon called the leap from the deposits to the crown jewels of the CIA pure speculation and a bridge too far. And then Ginsburg said the thing nobody outside the courtroom had heard before. It had taken the CIA months of going back through secret cables, years of them, just to work out who the people in that notebook actually were. And the sources named in it, she said, were not in China. Not in China. The judge went with the money. In sentencing Lee, T.S. Ellis III said it in a single sentence. He must have conveyed some classified information to the People's Republic of China in exchange for payment. Must have, not did. The most used verb in this entire story spoken from the bench. 19 years. Lee, 55 years old, answered with 16 words. I could only say I'm sorry. I let my country down. I let many people down. Now here is what did not happen in that courtroom. Prosecutors never mentioned the destruction of the CIA's China network. Not once. The Washington Post, which had a reporter in the room, noted it explicitly. They focused instead on the risk created by the information Lee gathered, which was designated secret. They told the court the CIA would carry out a damage assessment after the case concluded, working from the assumption that everything Lee collected had gone to the Chinese. An assumption. In the file that closes the worst counterintelligence disaster in decades, the U.S. Attorney G. Zachary Terwilliger admitted afterward why these cases look like this. They are exceedingly difficult, he said, because spies like Lee know how to cover their tracks, and there is, in his words, a push-pull about what the government can use in court without tipping its hand to its adversaries, which means the strongest evidence, if it exists, was never going to be read out loud. So the two explanations are still standing there, side by side, refusing to look at each other. The New York Times, reporting in 2017, said investigators were bitterly divided, and that years later the debate remained unresolved. The Times also reported that the mole hunt had zeroed in on a former officer from the CIA's China division and failed to gather enough evidence to arrest him, and that at the time of publication he was living in another Asian country. In January 2018, two sources with intelligence backgrounds told the Washington Times to be careful with the story everyone wanted to tell. One of them, a former official with long experience in East Asia, warned against the urge to announce that there was a big mole, that he was caught, and that the Chinese espionage problem was therefore solved. Some people, he said, are trying to do that with this case, which he thought was dangerous. The second source, 20 years in counterintelligence, described a heated debate inside the intelligence community over how deep Chinese penetration actually went and whether there were other moles. And Kelly O'Brien had already told the court in writing, on page 2 of her own affidavit, that she was not showing them everything. The document, she wrote, was intended merely to establish probable cause. It does not set forth all of my knowledge about this matter. 12 words at the end of a sentence in a legal filing, quietly admitting that the public version of this story is not the whole one. And in September 2022, 3 years after the sentencing, the last piece surfaced from outside the government entirely. Reporters at Reuters, working with researchers at the Citizen Lab in Toronto, went looking for the dead communications network and found it. More than 350 websites still sitting there on the open internet like abandoned houses on a street nobody drives down, used across at least 20 countries, among them Iran, Russia, Brazil, Thailand, and Ghana. The agency's answer to the whole disaster, according to foreign policy's sources, was to go backwards. Officers in China returned to older methods, meeting people in person, surreptitiously, slowly, the way it was done before anybody trusted a browser. One of those former officials framed the problem as a question that has no good answer. Will a system always stay encrypted, given the advances in technology? You're supposed to protect people forever. Jerry Chun Shing Lee is serving 19 years in a federal prison. He was never charged with handing over a single document. Kevin Mallory, a former CIA case officer, fluent Mandarin, $230,000 in debt, and behind on his mortgage when a Chinese intelligence officer messaged him on LinkedIn, was convicted in June 2018 and got 20 years from the same judge. Ron Rockwell Hansen, a retired Army warrant officer turned Defense Intelligence Agency case officer, took about $800,000 over 4 years and got 10. Mark Kelton, the spy hunter who would not accuse a man without ironclad evidence, was never publicly proved wrong and never publicly proved right. The unnamed suspect the mole hunt could not build a case against was last reported living somewhere in Asia, uncharged. The 18 to 20 sources have no names in any public document because the whole point of a true name is that it never gets printed. At the press conference after the sentencing, a senior Justice Department official named David Burns reached for Shakespeare to describe the year they had just had. 3 American intelligence officers convicted of spying for China. When sorrows come, they come not single spies, but in battalions. He was quoting Hamlet. In the play, that line is spoken by a king who is lying to everyone in the room about a death he caused and getting away with it. They had photographs of every one of those names in August 2012, and they let him get back on the plane.